The Atlantic Ocean has come to a climax. It is experiencing a sargasm. Now, an estimated 5,000 miles of murky seaweed has washed up. It's been creeping up through the Atlantic toward Florida's shoreline. And the seaweed, known as sargassum, is expected to impact the state's tourism through the summer. But there's a new devastating twist to this story. The sargassum is decaying. It smells terribly, with some describing it as the odor of rotting eggs. But to make matters worse, when this seaweed attaches itself to plastic, and as we know, the oceans are polluted with plastic, it creates this bacteria that is incredibly dangerous for humans. So we'll get to those details in a moment, but first, what is sargassum exactly? Giant clumps of the 13 million ton morass labeled the Great Atlantic Sargassum Belt are washing up on Florida's beaches. Scientists are warning of a real life threat from the piles of decomposing algae, namely high levels of the flesh-eating Vibrio bacteria lurking in the vegetation. So they've done some testing and the samples have shown to have this incredibly dangerous bacteria. The samples tested from the Caribbean and Sargasso Sea within the Atlantic were abundant with plastic debris, which interacted with the algae and bacteria to create a perfect pathogen storm with implications for both marine life, which is disastrous, of course, and of course, public health. Tracy Mincer, who is an assistant professor of biology over at FAU's Harbor Branch Oceanographic, I can never say that word, sorry. Anyway, she's at FAU. She says, our lab work showed that these Vibrio are extremely aggressive and can seek out and stick to plastics within minutes. And she also said that the seaweed belt stretching from the Gulf of Mexico to the African coast provided the perfect breeding ground for omnivorous strains of the bacteria that target both plant and animal life, and associated microbial flora potentially harboring potent levels of pathogens. They're worried that this is basically like flesh-eating bacteria level bacteria.
Oh, great, that sounds lovely.
And mostly because of its interaction with plastic.
Okay, so we take a perfectly lovely sounding story and turn it into, quote, a perfect pathogen storm, which sounds disastrous. Okay,
yeah.
But back to the fun for a second. So let me get this right. The Vibrio leads to the sargassum.
Oh my God.
I mean, look, we didn't make it up.
Why did they have to name it this way?
Okay.
Like, why'd they have to do it? Then children like us have difficulty taking the story as seriously as it deserves.
100%. Yeah. So on our show, Old School, Ben and I make up words, and they're super fun words, like brolet. Means so drunk that you're like a fraternity brother. Okay, that's a mid example. Okay, we've got a lot of great ones that we made up through the years. Sargasm sounds like one of those. And it would be something so sarcastic that it makes you go, oh, when you recognize it. Okay, that's a sargasm. Okay. But instead, it turns out that the real definition is something terrible and awful.
I mean, if you knew nothing about this story and someone asked you, do you want the ocean to have a sargasm? I'd be like, yeah, why not? Everyone deserves to have a sargasm at least once, you know?
Yeah.
But no, you don't. Once you learn the details, you want to keep the
sargasm to a minimum.
Yes, okay. Yeah, you know.
So, all right, look, now on to serious stuff. Guys, because of mainly the fossil fuel industry financing so much of our politicians through campaign contributions, what we would call bribes, we continue to have debates we shouldn't have. Something as simple as, do we affect the environment? Do human beings affect the environment, and sometimes in a negative way? The clear answer to that is, of course, of course. Now that doesn't mean that everything we do negatively affects the environment. It doesn't mean that everything we do that negatively affects the environment needs giant changes and a giant amount of money being spent on it, etc. But it does mean that we gotta be really careful, because we could really throw off ecosystems and create significant problems. And it looks like, unfortunately, here we go again. Our plastics are causing significant problems in the ocean. So you could do one of several things. You could do what industry wants. In this case, it would mainly be the plastics industry, which, funny enough, is also related to the fossil fuel industry.
Right.
And you could say, oh, just ignore the problem. I bet it goes away when we put more plastic in the oceans. And that is the tack that the great majority of politicians will take because they're bribed to take that position. You could take the position of, hey, let's study it. And if it's as problematic as it appears to us now on the surface of the ocean, then we've got to take significant action, how much action, etc. But our democracy is so broken, no one's gonna have an intelligent conversation about it.
No,
and the guys who just made sargasm jokes are the ones telling you no one's gonna even have an intelligent conversation about it because everything is broken down to who got paid for what.
But look, the point I wanna make, the serious substantive point I wanna make about this story is the state of Florida is dedicating between $5 to $6 million on cleanup efforts because understand if they don't clean up the Florida shores, the beaches, that's gonna hurt tourism, it's gonna hurt revenue for the state. And so they have teams of people cleaning up, they're spending a ton of money on the cleanup efforts. First of all, the individuals cleaning this up have to wear a lot more protective gear to ensure that they don't get sick from the cleanup efforts. Now knowing how this decomposing algae interacts with plastics and creates this bacteria that's life-threatening to some people, especially those with weakened immune systems. But why should the Florida taxpayers have to pay for that?
Yeah, and I'll tell you why they do pay for it. Of course, the answer is they shouldn't have to pay for it. But this is big tourism versus big plastic. Now, how do they resolve that? Because both make a lot of money and both bribe politicians. Give campaign contributions to politicians. So the way they resolve it is, no, we don't fix the core of the problem, which would mean costing big plastic some money. Because we can't do that because they pay us, right? But big tourism needs the help. So instead of fixing the core of the problem, which is throwing plastic into the ocean, we're gonna just clean up the consequences.
That's right, that's exactly right.
So that way we're spending even more taxpayer money. We're gonna spend double the taxpayer money and we're gonna get people sick in the cleanup just so that we can make both contributors happy. That's the sick state of our democracy, which leads to the sick state in our oceans.
And to be clear, while sargassum has washed up to shore before, this isn't a new thing, the amount has been increasing consistently over the last decade. And so the problem continues to grow. The state continues to put a Band-Aid on it by dealing with the symptoms or the consequences of what we're doing to the environment. And in the end, the people who really lose are ordinary taxpayers because industry privatizes the gains, socializes the losses. And that's where we're at.
Yeah, and by the way, when they say, oh, we can't fight climate change because it'll cost too much money. We can't fight plastic in the oceans because it'll cost too much money. No, it costs just as much, if not more, to clean up the consequences.
Right.
Also in climate change, to clean up the consequences from the more extreme weather events. But it's not how much it costs, it's who does it cost.
Yeah, who pays for it?
Who pays for it? So if it's the taxpayer paying for it, everybody in politics is happy. Just put it on the taxpayer, put it on the taxpayer. If it's companies paying the price, oh, no, then it costs too much. And that's how this game is played. Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.